Welcome back to the show. This week, I have with me Darlene Meissner, and she and I connected because we both share our ADHD diagnosis. And when we connected, we realized that we have not only some similarities from childhood, but a lot of similarities now that we are adults. And so, what we want to talk about today is some of the struggles that we have had as adults and how we feel like things possibly could have been different when we were younger that would have not made the struggles exist, or maybe not made them as extreme as they have been. So that's our discussion today. Darlene, please tell us who you are.
Thanks for having me, Steph. I'm happy to be here with
I am
you
happy to have
today, Chatty.
you.
So I'm an adult living with ADHD combined type with a reading disorder. So combined type meaning both types of ADHD. I'm a mom, I'm a dog grandma, I'm a social worker, I'm a therapist, I'm a coach, I'm an activist, I'm a feminist, I'm an advocate.
All the things. Awesome. So when Darlene and I were talking, one of the topics that came up for us was our relationships as adults. And one of the things that I have realized is I don't have significant challenges, and didn't as a child, with friendships. Those have not been a significant challenge for me, but romantic relationships have always been difficult for me. And as I've gotten older and done a lot more kind of learning and growing in this area, one of the things that I've realized is that when we're kids, the relationships that we are exposed to are what we see as a normal relationship, right? So anything you're exposed to as a child, to you, is normal. The house you live in, the habits that your family has, the amount of money that you have, the way people relate to each other, that's your normal. And so until you're exposed to other people's normal, you often don't even realize how different your normal is from other people. And so because of that, the relationships that we have with our parents, the relationship our parents have with each other, the relationships our parents have with other adults, we start to see those relationships as normal. And so if our relationship with our parents, or if our parents' relationship with each other is strained, is damaged, is dysfunctional, we only know that that's what relationships look like. And so we tend to carry that out into our adult relationships. And one of the things that I think really brought this home for me, this was probably the first time I realized it, is, if you don't know this, I went through a divorce right before lockdown, like weeks before lockdown. My divorce was final. But one of the things that I realized as things were becoming final is there was this moment that I had this realization that my husband was my mom. Like, that they presented in the same way, and the way I felt when I was with each of them was very similar, which wasn't a good thing. But I was in this relationship for 10 years because it was what I knew. It was what was comfortable to me. It was my normal. So that's where Darlene and I are going to start today, just on that concept of, as a parent, the relationship you have with your child and the relationship you have with other people sets the stage for what your child thinks is a normal relationship. So, when I had a relationship with one parent where I always felt like I was wrong, I always felt like I was doing something wrong, I felt like everything was my fault. I ended up in a 10-year romantic relationship where I always felt like everything was my fault, and I always felt like I was wrong. But whereas someone else may say, "Oh, I'm absolutely not staying in this relationship," to me, that's what a relationship was. So that was my experience. And that's when it really became clear to me how much our dynamics growing up affect what we think we should be looking for as we get older. So, Darlene, I'm going to stop talking now because that was a lot coming out of my mouth. What would you like to say to that?
There's so much there. And one of the things that you and I talked about before coming on here was getting into trouble at home and getting into trouble at school, and how that continued throughout our lives in those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And both of us being diagnosed with ADHD, we, we've lived a life with having this in some type of way, creating these relationships like you're talking about, and now how this is transferred to us as adults. And if we had those proper supports when we were younger, then perhaps that could have been a way to set us up for success in a different way, in a more structured way that would give us patience and empathy and compassion. But when we're dealing with folks who don't know how to deal with our ADHD, then we're left with making things up as we go. And if our brains are going like this, then we might be going like this too.
Yeah. 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 I think, you and I had talked about just the concept of people having patience with us. And you had mentioned, that Darlene and I are about the same age. And so when we were growing up, I don't know that it's changed a whole lot. I just think there's a lot more, I guess, pushback now, but just the concept that kids are meant to be compliant, that at home and at school, that's probably a lot of people listening are around our same age and grew up, in that same environment, that kids are meant to be compliant. And so for those of us who aren't compliant, it's really challenging to grow up in a space like that, where you're expected, the be seen and not heard, and that kind of thing. And sometimes, I know for me, often my non-compliance was very intentional. Often I was very intentionally being, just trying to disrupt the norm or whatever. But also there's times where non-compliance is not intentional at all. It comes from, there are times even now as an adult where somebody will ask me to do something and I just don't understand what they're asking me to do. I was having, about a week ago, maybe, I was having a Zoom meeting with somebody that was, I had contacted her to help me with something. And we were on Zoom and she was asking me questions. And every time I would answer her, she basically would not accept my answer and was telling me that I wasn't answering the question correctly, or would tell me that my answer wasn't it wasn't the right answer. And it was so bizarre because after a couple minutes, I started crying. Like, I am an adult. Like, I started crying. And so I'm trying to figure out what is going on. And I shut down. I couldn't even hear her talking anymore because I had just shut down. And I told her, because I'm big into people giving each other feedback. And so I told her, I said, I think our personalities are not a good match. I said, I'm trying to answer your questions, and every time I do, you tell me that I'm wrong. I said, there was one time I even repeated the example that you gave for me to how to answer the question, and you still told me that I wasn't answering the question correctly. And so I said, I have shut down. I'm very uncomfortable. And I said, it's because you keep making me feel like I'm wrong. No matter what I try, you are making me feel like I'm wrong. So this is me a week ago as an adult, and I was crying. And I realized that it's because it was triggering how I used to always feel. I used to always feel like I was wrong. So my point being, sometimes the non-compliance is completely unintentional. I was trying my damn best to engage in this conversation and to answer the questions that she was asking me, and it just was not it wasn't being successful, and I just kind of shut down. And Darlene, I would imagine because you have a different academic profile than me, that may be even more prevalent of an experience for you.
Well, like, as you're sharing that, I could, like, there's a pit in my like in my stomach, just hardening and knowing exactly how you feel. And I've been there so many times as an adult. And as you're talking about it, it's so awful. I'm so sorry that you went through that.
Thank you.
And, I try to think sometimes, did these things happen when I was a kid? Probably. I remember being told to listen, to focus, to stop crying when, or there she's upset again. I think when I was young, actually, I would get angry more. Uh, that was my defense. I
Mhm.
didn't know what people are asking me to do. I didn't understand it. Or I had questions about it. I would question everything. And when we're told to be compliant in whatever way that is, to listen, to stop, to listen, to stop, and we don't understand why, then it becomes very frustrating. And then we lash out in all these different ways. It could be crying, it could be anger, it could be having a temper tantrum. And my mom will say to this day that I hit the terrible twos and never came out. And even though it's true, it's a real terrible message for a young person to be brought up with their whole
Mhm.
life, that I'm a terrible 2-year-old at my age of 45. And I definitely feel you on that getting just bumbled up, right?
Mhm.
Bumbled up when somebody's talking to us. And I can't tell you how many times I cry out of confusion, out of frustration because
Mhm.
of confusion, because I can't seem to make sense of it in my brain.
Yeah, the overwhelm for me, I think is pretty chronic. I've actually realized that when I'm learning something new, if I'm taking a course or, just whatever, I have to listen or watch it one time and do something like I do Sudoku. That's kind of my brain distraction. And then I have to go back and listen and watch it the second time to actually be able to implement it. Because the first time I listen and watch something, I'm just trying to not get overwhelmed. And so I've learned that it takes me twice as long to go through content and information because the first time it's overwhelming and I'm just trying to take in what I can. And then the second time I listen or watch sometimes second time still, if it's something new or technical. But I've learned that about myself that I cannot listen or watch something the first time and move forward with it. Uh,
Sometimes it's 3 times, and
yeah.
sometimes it's 4 times. Honestly, when I'm trying to learn something new, if it's an online program, for example, I'll pause it and I'll try to do the thing. So they say, do this one step. I pause what I'm doing. I do that one step. Next, pause it, and do it like that.
Mhm.
Um, it seems to be sometimes the only way I can get through. I try to sign up for online programs less now. And I mean, like, very recently, because I
Yeah.
know I'm not it's not the best way for me to learn. And group coaching or group programs are also not the best way for me to learn. It's the one-to-one. I need the one-to-one. I need the absolute focus. So then I will focus when I'm with you and you are talking to me and we can go back and forth. If I have to sit and listen, then I don't know where my brain is going to go because it wanders. It'll wander. I'll get caught up in somebody else asking a different question when I'm stuck on this other piece. And then more people come in and I don't have the confidence, even now at my age, I don't have the confidence to speak up in the group to say, I don't understand this because I feel dumb. I
Mhm.
feel like, did I miss something when my mind wandered off? And was this question already answered? Did they already go through this when I was thinking about, oh, the sky?
Yeah.
That I'm thinking about. And it is definitely a struggle. So one of the other pieces to that is like you, because we both had talked about this previously, is that we are not medicated. So
Mm.
I have tried medication. I was originally diagnosed in grade 6 and didn't know. I didn't know that I had it. I was diagnosed in school. I found out only in grade 10 when I was getting kicked out of one high school, and I was meeting with my mom and the school administrator to get me into this new school because of my behaviors. So she had mentioned it that day to the administrator, saying, "Oh, she has ADHD." And I remember looking at her and saying, "I do." I had no idea. So this is 4 years later, no programming, no supports, no knowledge, no medication, nothing, just being left to my own devices, always knowing that I was a problem,
Mhm.
because I was always being told, no matter where I went, that I was a problem. And I was a problem. My behavior was a problem,
Mhm.
but I wasn't supported in that from anywhere.
Mhm.
And so then in my first undergrad, in my late 20s, because I went to university as a mature student. I started school when I was 25, and I decided to get diagnosed, thinking maybe this would help support me in all the ways that I'm not feeling like I fit in university. How come I don't know what this word is? How, like, I remember going through that first degree, I would read a sentence in a textbook or an article, and a word would come up, and I wouldn't know what it was. And by this time now we had internet. So I
Mhm.
would look up a word on dictionary.com, figure out what it meant, and I wouldn't even get through the sentence and another word would come up because I didn't do well in school. I never did well in school. So all these words and all this academic um, language and
Mhm.
writing, I didn't get that in high school because I was all over the place. I barely did high school. And then later on, I ended up um, going back as a mature student for high school. So I only needed to get a few credits. So it's not as if I, experienced that full experience, that
Mhm.
learning experience in all those courses. So I was re-diagnosed in university in that first undergrad. And, it was so validating. It was validating to have the diagnosis and to see it for myself. And it was validating to see what they suggested in that report and how the university could support me.
Mhm.
Now, I ended up getting re-diagnosed at the end of that first undergrad. And so the supports that they offered didn't really apply to me
Yeah.
at that time. And I did, going on to school, because I've gone through two other programs since then. I've utilized some, but not a lot, because there's a lot of shame in that. There's always been a lot of shame. There's been tons and tons of shame because I've always been the one scared to speak up, like I'm saying, been the one who doesn't want to ask the questions, feeling stupid, feeling embarrassed. That has not changed. That has not changed from when I was a kid to today. Even today, people will explain things to me and I don't get it and I pretend I understand and I walk away
Mhm.
and I'll say, I don't even know the answer to that question.
I experienced that too. I think, one of the things that I do in my program that I think is kind of counterintuitive, sometimes when I say it, um, not everybody agrees with it, but in my program, everything is always okay. No matter how you feel, it's always okay. It's always okay to feel frustrated. It's always okay to feel confused. It's always okay to feel sad, angry, whatever. It's always okay to feel how you feel. And along with that, the lesson component of my program, it's very conversational, but it's a group, right? And so one of the things that I teach the kids is that if they ever find that they weren't paying attention and they don't really know what's going on, especially if maybe I ask them a question and they have no idea what's going on, is I want them to know that it's always okay to not pay attention, because it is impossible for anybody to pay attention all the time. And so it is always okay when somebody is not paying attention. We cannot regulate our attention like people who don't struggle with ADHD can regulate their attention. The same with all my autistic kids. They struggle with regulating their attention as well. And so that's a really big thing, is that there is no shame in my program when somebody's not paying attention. And then what I teach them to do is, if I ask a question and they have no idea what I'm talking about, is for them to say, can you please repeat that? Or to even say, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention, because I'm not going to get upset about that, right? It is okay that you weren't paying attention. I would much rather a kiddo ask me to explain or to repeat than for them to pretend like they know what's happening, or for them to feel embarrassed that they don't know what's happening. And so anytime that happens, I actually point it out to the whole class. I'm like, hey guys, is it okay to not pay attention? And by now they all know that the answer is yes, it is okay to not pay attention. And then it makes that one kiddo not feel embarrassed or ashamed, right? Because as a group, we are validating that it is okay to not pay attention. And I'll point it out when it happens to me too. Sometimes in the group, somebody will say something and I'm off, right? And so I'll put, oh, you guys, I was not paying attention. I was thinking about, whatever. So I think it's really important for that to be reinforced with the kids, that it's always okay to be upset. It's always okay to be embarrassed. However you feel is okay. And it's okay that there are times that you're not paying attention. It's okay that there are times that you don't understand something, right? But I think in a compliance-based system, we're taught that that's not okay. But it's just so darn unrealistic, right? For
And this,
anybody.
you're offering this grace that was not afforded to us in the time that we grew up.
Mm-hmm.
We did not have Google. We could not search this out, even if I did know it before grade 10. Either way, we didn't have, there wasn't enough out there even talking about it. It was maybe being started to talk about. And who knows, maybe when I was diagnosed, I don't know how that went. I remember being in like the resource room at school, and I didn't know that I was being tested. I thought I was hanging out with the resource teacher, and that was great. It was so fun. She was so lovely. And I don't know if when they did that diagnosis, did they also offer the supports?
Right.
Were my parents offered that, or was it only medication, which they decided not to put me on? So, and I know that because my mom has told, well, I wasn't on any, for one, but my mom has told me that she didn't want to put me on medication. And we may or may not have had a conversation about that, which I don't remember right now.
Mm-hmm.
But who knows if they were given that list of supports
Mm-hmm.
like I was in university. They said, this is what you can do. You can have less of a caseload. You can have this, you can have this, you can have this. And who knows what that looked like for an elementary child to be, diagnosed in the time that I was diagnosed.
Right.
May have been the same for you at this, like, again, we're only a couple of years apart.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about that grace that you're giving your students, this is grace that we weren't afforded. I wasn't afforded it at school. I wasn't afforded it at home. But where I was afforded grace was with my grandparents. And so let's talk a little bit about what it felt like to not be supported by the adults in our life, and then to be afforded that grace by other adults.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because grandparents are very predominantly the person that anytime I have a similar conversation with someone, grandparent is the primary person that comes up as being that supportive figure. And so I think there are definitely times, even, I'm not a parent, But even as the person running this program for my students, there are days where I am not the best support for them because of my own life, right? There are days where I very rarely get frustrated with my students because I just we are the same, right? But the days that I notice that that starts happening is the days when my personal life is maybe a little rocky. So there's just something going on with me. And then I have a coworker and I try to take a step back because I want my kids to have the most positive, successful experience possible. And there are days where I am not the one providing that. You know, there are days where I get a little bit snippy. There are days where I am distracted and not present. But on those days, it's important for me to recognize that and to let someone else who's in a better position come in and provide that support. And I think, you know, you and I definitely connect over that person being a grandparent. My grandparents, we moved when I was 2. So we were the only family in this part of the country. So the only time that I saw my grandparents was every summer. I would get shipped off to them. My brother and I would get sent, and then sometimes at the holidays, depending on what was going on, we would see them. So and this was before cell phones and things like that. So my relationship with my grandmother mainly was summer bonding until I was older. And then, there was a lot more contact. So I don't think it always has to be somebody that has a strong physical presence. I think it's very helpful if it is, but I do think we all need that person in our lives that is always in our corner. That is always there to support us, to cheer us on, to be our number one fan. And I think as a parent, that you're not capable of always being that person. As a teacher, you're not capable of always being that person because we've got our own stuff going on. So I think it's being able to identify who else could step in. I know for some of my students, they have uncles or aunts that are very important people in their lives. I can think of one kiddo that has weekly Zoom time with an uncle. I can think of another kiddo that goes on vacation with an aunt. So another kiddo whose aunt is very instrumental in him here, brings him here, picks him up. I talk to her just like I talk to his mom. So it doesn't, I think it could be a teacher, it could be a coach, it could be a neighbor. But I think just having other people that can relate to your kid and love them and support them, either for those times when you're just not able to, or just in addition to how you love and support your kiddo.
And it's a team, right? That saying, it takes a village is a saying for a reason. It does take a village. It's not easy doing it alone. And I was a single parent. I was a single parent at the young age of 18. So my daughter's an adult now.
Wow.
And it was hard. I didn't have someone to tag team with. And I really like that you're talking about this, like even in your work, you can tag off, because that's what it is. It's tag teaming. We're not always on. We can't always be our best selves. Or maybe other people can. I don't know.
It's not just us.
It's not just us, I'm sure. And one of the other things that has come up that we talked about is kids can't have too many people to love them. And so to have all these people set up in a young person's life to be there when we can't for whatever reason is really, really key. And we get less overwhelmed as parents, teachers, coaches, whatever our role is. We need the help. They need a diverse, array of folks to be around, Because if I'm thinking one way and you think a total different way, wouldn't it be nice for them to have, you know,
That
introduction
exposure.
to a
Yeah.
different yes, and so that's helpful too, for them to be able to see different things in life. That youth that you're talking about who goes on trips with their aunt, like, what an experience. Or even, like, Zoom calls with their uncle. I remember, like, loving going for sleepovers with my grandparents. I would get to snuggle in bed with my grandma. Oh, it was the best.
Yeah. Yeah. It's as you're talking, I'm thinking about this situation that actually happened recently. There's he's an adult that I started working with. He's one of the first students when I started my business, Starfish Social Club. He's one of the first students, and his mom and I um, have a really strong relationship. He and I have a really strong relationship. Actually, he worked here for a little while as a teaching assistant because that's something that the students in my program, when I have a need, I look and see who's been in this program for a while. And so I pay them to be a teaching assistant to help teach other kids that are newer or younger or whatever. So this I'm going to call him a kiddo just because I like that word, but he's actually an adult. This kiddo in particular, I remember because he worked for me. He has my personal phone number, and a few years ago he texted me that his grandparent had passed away. And the reason that he was texting me was because he was concerned about that he wasn't feeling the emotions that he thought he should be feeling, and that was bothering him, that he felt like he should be feeling certain things and he wasn't. And so he and I, had a whole text conversation about it, and I, at the end, I screenshotted it and sent it to his mom just so she knew what we were talking about. But what struck me is that I was the person that this person chose to have this conversation with, that's the impact that we've had, is that he chose me to have this conversation with. A couple weeks ago, as when we're recording this, a couple weeks ago, he called me. He actually lives out of state now. He lives on the other side of the country. And he called me, and we were in summer camp. And so I just texted him and I said, "Hey, I'll call you back when we're done," which there wasn't that much time left. And when I called him, he was in the middle of a significant meltdown. It's actually like, I've actually never experienced him that way. He was just really, really having a hard time. And I could hear his mom. I think he had me on speaker, and his mom was in the background, and she was having a really hard time. And I think she was having a hard time that he was having such a hard time. And then their dynamics had kind of clashed. But it was the fact that he reached out to me. It's been a couple years since I've even seen him, but I'm the person that he chose to call to help with this situation. And, his mom ended up, being part of it. And it was just this, the three of us trying to, work on this together. And the love and support between the three of us was just really overwhelming. And I'm not somebody that this person, I don't talk to him on any kind of regular basis. But the fact that I'm the person that he chose to call when he was in a really, really scary place, like, just means so much to me, and his mom was there. But again, we are not always capable of just being completely objective and supportive. We're not always capable of being that person. There's been so many times in my career where I have not been capable of being that person for kids, when I was going through a really difficult breakup. There were months where I was not in a great place emotionally. Um, so I think we need to have grace for ourselves, that we just cannot always be that person. but who can be? You know, who can we bring in? Families, friends, teachers, neighbors, that can support not only our kid, but us too, you know?
And that really speaks to how safe he feels with you. And it's nice that he has that.
Yeah.
He's lucky he has that.
And even, you know, I was just reiterating, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be upset, right? When he was explaining to me what had happened, it's okay to be upset. It is okay. Um, and so, yeah, I just, you know, everybody needs that person that they know that they can call or text or show up on the doorstep or, you know, whatever. Whew, okay. Mm. Let me get out of my
Because
emotional state.
we're always going through things, right? And that mom couldn't be there. She was dealing with her own grief and loss and whatever else was going on. I'm sure 100 other things, and trying to manage it all and juggle everything at the same time. And this person is also struggling and she couldn't be
Yeah.
there.
And, you know, I have realized that when it's a parent and their own child, it's so much more difficult to remove yourself emotionally from that situation, right? And so I think I'm not a parent. I was a foster parent for a while to a really, really challenging kid. And I experienced that even with this kid who wasn't even my kid, but he was living with me. I was responsible for him. And I experienced that with him, that I would sometimes get frustrated or overwhelmed at the things that he was doing, um, just because I felt responsible for him. And so I think sometimes we just get caught up in it as well, with never intending to, but just sometimes I think there's a lot of parent guilt. I think there's a lot of parent, you know, sense of responsibility. And so I think sometimes it's hard to be the person who can best support your kiddo when you also need support, when you're also dealing with your own emotions around what your kiddo's saying or what happened, or, you know, their own processing their own feelings. I think we all, even as a teacher, you get that too, you know, just there's been lots of times in my career where I felt like I don't know how to help this kiddo. Like I don't know what to do right now that would be helpful. And so ask some, you know, I've asked someone, hey, I just don't know what to do. I don't want to make it worse. I just don't know what to do. And then someone else can come in and, you know, just be more helpful than I could have been in that situation.
And you're asking. So if you are asking someone to come in, uh, good on you. Sometimes we either don't have someone to ask or we can't even think about asking in that
Right.
moment. And, you know, here we are talking about our grandparents as supports for us and different family members that kids have as supports. But the other piece is some families, functional or dysfunctional, whatever that means, some families don't have other family members to help
Hmm.
out. Some
Hmm.
kids, and you're bringing up foster kids. As a social worker, I worked in many different areas, and one being child welfare. I was also a foster parent for a few years, and it's not a luxury. Grandparents meaning,
Hmm.
and other family members, it's not a luxury that's afforded to all.
Hmm.
So there's lots of people growing up, pardon me, kids growing up that don't have one or two or three family members,
Hmm.
family of origin members to go to when they need support. Some kids are growing up without anybody. Some kids are growing up in the foster care system, and their guardian is their social worker, who's a case manager.
Yeah.
That's not natural.
Yeah.
And they don't have someone to connect with. which is why it's even more important that the adults in their lives are there for them. And that changes throughout their lives so much for folks growing up in foster care.
Mm-hmm.
That's really unfortunate because it does a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, and there's, there's a concept, I think there's research behind it, that it just takes one adult in a child's life to make a difference, right? Either to show them the possibility of how their future could be different, but really just to show them that they're important and that they're cared for and that they're loved, and to just give them that sense of hope for the future. It just takes one adult. So ideally that's a parent, right? But that's not everybody's experience. But it could be a teacher, it could be a neighbor, it could be, an aunt or an uncle. It could be anybody, right? It really could be anybody. Even here, I know, in the waiting room, that for the parents who come in, our older kids can come and go on their own. But for the parents who come in, sometimes the kids get to know other people's parents, right? Because they see them every week or whatever. And so sometimes it could even be somebody else's parent. I know there's lots of just kids who maybe don't have the best childhood and they have bonded with someone else's parent. I'm not talking about my kids here, but just out in the world, right? That they've bonded with someone else's parent. Even as an adult, your partner's parent, right? Your boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife's parent can become like a surrogate parent for you. There's a family that's in my program here that there was a period of time where we kind of had that relationship. They were like my surrogate parents, just because I currently don't have a relationship with my parents. And so while it doesn't seem like it's that big of a deal because I'm an adult, it's a big deal,
Yeah, it is.
So
It
yeah.
is. It makes Mother's Day and Father's Day very complicated. It makes birthdays complicated.
Christmas, Thanksgiving.
Holidays complicated.
Yeah.
Yes. And even and right now I'm traveling. And so the difficult relationship that I have with my dad, it comes out when I watch families on vacation together,
Mhm.
getting along. And maybe it's in that moment. Maybe they're not always getting. I try to remind myself of that, right? Because that is the reality, that they don't get along all the time. But
Mm.
some families do, yes, but not all, not most.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Darlene, is there anything else that you would like to add to our conversation before we wrap up? Just in terms of how parents can support I would say the emotional growth of their kids, so that when they grow up like us and become adults, they have more secure, more, what's a way to say it? Their relationships are more secure, more stable, and more reaffirming, I guess, as opposed to dysfunctional.
Accessing supports. So um, supports at school, groups, community programs, look in newsletters, Google things. Um, Big Brothers Big Sisters is another really good option for folks, and that's a good one for single parents. They
Mhm.
won't generally match a young person up with a mentor unless they have a parent who's not in their lives. So if they have both parents, then they usually don't. So that's a good resource for folks as well.
Yeah.
um, and the Boys and Girls Club, of course, sports,
Mhm.
coaches, team environments. So just
I think even other parents of autistic and ADHD kids, right?
yeah,
I mean, even that you meet through my program, through school, through other maybe groups that your kid is in that's targeted, towards kids with social learning challenges. I think just the camaraderie that comes along with knowing that you're not alone. And sometimes you can do, Friday night swaps, or just even just going somewhere together with your kids, but having that experience of having someone else that you can call, that you can talk to, that understands what life is like, right? Because I know I have learned through doing what I do that being a special needs parent can be very isolating, because the majority of people are not special needs parents. And so when you find yourself in that minority, it can be very isolating. You may be the only person in your family that's experienced that. You may be the only person in your friend group that's experiencing that. And so I think the importance of connecting with other people that can share that journey with you, because they're on the same journey, you know? Yeah. Okay. Darlene, before we go, please tell the people where they can find you online, whatever contact information you would like to share, if anybody would like to reach out and see more about you and what you do.
I'm not extremely active on social media, but you can find me on Instagram at ms.darlene.meissner.
Okay.
And I have a website that's also my name, darlenemeissner.com. And you can find me there.
Awesome. We'll put all that in all the notes for YouTube, podcast, blog, all that kind of stuff, so people can connect to you there. Darlene, thank you so much for spending the morning with me. I really appreciate it. It's been really great to connect. So thank you for being here.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thanks everybody for playing along, and we'll see you again next week.